story that was so heartfelt and moving. And as a backdrop to be talking about trauma. So everyone in this room has experienced some kind of trauma, even if you are a physician treating a patient, whether you're a parent, you're experiencing it yourself, all different kinds of fun-filled trauma, all different ways, all different times, all different flavors. And when it comes to trauma, different people need different ways to get through it. As you heard on the panel, I mean, some people, they want to know, I'm going to get past it, everything's great. Some people want to feel validated, I'm afraid to die. And they don't want to hear you'll be fine. They want to hear you saying, yeah, I get why you're scared to die. So everybody, those are just two of many, many, many examples of how you deal with trauma. So with that in mind, I mean, I think we all find these meetings incredibly helpful and inspiring. We wanted to take the opportunity to really recognize people deal with things differently. And if we don't address our mental health and how to deal with it, we're not in a position to help others beyond us and even help ourselves. So with that in mind, we're very fortunate in this panel in that we have Bruce McClary from Kennedy Krieger, who has helped many, many people through trauma, to talk us through more on a professional level in terms of how we deal with trauma. And then we're very fortunate to have Jesse Torrey help us through with some mental health, mindfulness approaches, just given it's been a pretty intense couple of days. But yeah, so with that, let me have Bruce present. I think Bruce is going to present first. If that's it. No, you want to start? Should we all sit up? No. We all sit up? Yeah.
How about now? You know, over the last couple of days, I like to say there was no trauma in the room. That would be a lie. We all have trauma. Everybody in this room has suffered some form of trauma. I mean, part of me wanted to play the theme from Jaws, because those of us that are older in the 70s, every time we went into the water and somebody played that, I was like, oh my God, what is it? You know, watching just the panel that was up yesterday, the panel that was just up here today, seeing people share their experiences and talk about how difficult this has been. You've all suffered trauma. Listen to Dr. Eichler talk about it yesterday and shed tears of their experience. I mean, let's see, we've talked about generational trauma here already. Definitely vicarious trauma for the caregivers. You know, and I know you guys talk about trauma. It's the dreams you have before you present to this group about trauma, because you guys are the most informed human beings on the planet Earth. Okay, you guys get really involved. Somebody mentioned earlier about helicopters. Some of you guys have way too many rotors on your helicopters. Just saying, way too many rotors. And sometimes you have to let those go. And when you have kids that are sick and they're going off to college, that's a difficult thing to do. But you also have to give them that blessing that they can also figure things out themselves. Just a little about me. I've been doing this a long time. You know, my dad was a doctor. He wanted to be a surgeon. I took organic chemistry and decided there is no way I'm going to be a surgeon, because I liked it so much I took it twice. So I'm one of those odd social workers. I actually had a Bachelor of Science in chemistry, a minor in mathematics, and Bachelor of Science in sociology. And then I decided, what do I want to do? So I decided to become a social worker. And I've been doing it for almost 40 years. Started out at Hopkins many years ago, worked in Maryland at the RIM program, which is a rare and expensive case management program for children that have lots of struggles in their lives, set up by our Medicaid system. And then they recruited me over to Kennedy Krieger, and I've been there about 17 years. And I've been doing therapy for almost 30 years with patients who have chronic illnesses. And I know for a lot of you out there, that's something that's difficult to find. And a therapist is somebody that understands chronic illness. And I'll touch on some ideas today on what we can do around that. This is just a picture of Kennedy Krieger, because you got to do that thing. This is the building. That's the building that I work in. That's one of our newest buildings at the Institute. People say, where's Kennedy Krieger? It's in Baltimore. But if I say it's right across the street from Johns Hopkins Hospital, people have heard of Johns Hopkins Hospital. What kinds of trauma are there? Well, there's this thing when people have mental illness. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, the DSM. There are lots of kinds of trauma, but psychiatrists, wouldn't you agree, have not wanted us to label different kinds of trauma. So they've limited us to PTSD and complex PTSD. But that doesn't mean that there isn't sexual trauma, generational trauma, bullying, the trauma that you feel when the first time you hear the information about a diagnosis from a test. And you remember that day. People remember 1986 when the Challenger blew up. They remember what they were doing that day. They remember what you were doing on 9/11. Why? Because that's emboldened in our head, in our brain. It was a traumatic event. And trauma is like a file cabinet, okay? Things that happen to us as we grow up that bothered us and scared us, it's in that file cabinet. Whether we put police tape and padlocks on it, it's never totally closed. What gets complex about that is every time something new happens, that stupid file cabinet opens up and dumps all those feelings into what's happening in today's event. So what might be a little thing has a lot of feeling behind it. And people watching it may say, whoa, what is the problem with them? They can't function today. They're really like flipping out. Emotional dysregulation happens a lot with trauma. Most of you have suffered medical trauma. Think of all the things that you've had to deal with. First of all, some of you, like, where's our friend from Arkansas? Eric, it's like, had anybody heard of ALD in Arkansas? A few. But first you guys go in and you find out what you don't have. And you go to another doctor and you add to your checklist of things that you don't have. But it's not helping me because this, and this aren't working. But nobody's giving me an answer. That creates anxiety, which creates stress, which leads to frustration, which adds to our trauma. Then we get the answer. Now what do? We look it up. I'm really not a fan of Dr. Google, but we all do it. And I know somebody talked about being on the internet a lot. I'm not a blog fan. My blogs can be good, but they also can be bad. You hear the very best and the very worst, but often not the everyday. This is what it's like to live with this. People that have medical trauma. I've seen some people that have gone through our pain program at Kennedy Krieger. They're doing fine now, but they came in for a wheelchair adjustment. And no offense, Jen. They saw their physical therapist who worked with them on the pain program 5 years ago. And they hadn't seen him for 5 years, and they've been feeling fine. And they had a panic attack. Why? Because that was not really a fun memory of when they were on the pain treatment program. And it just kind of came in and encompassed them. And they'll talk about they feel really terrible. I had a young girl I've been seeing for about a year for trauma. And she'd been to 7 therapists. And she says, they keep giving me tools. I said, well, if you've been to 7 therapists, your toolbox is pretty full. She could tell me all the different things to do. But she said, none of it's working. I'm like, why? Any ideas? Well, she'd had some traumatic experiences at Kennedy Krieger, going through a program. And she was afraid to tell anybody that. And I was like the old guy. She'd always seen these young therapists, you know. And about the 3rd session, she told her mom, she goes, she's 18, just went off to college. She goes, I don't know, this guy's really strange, but I kind of like him. And she said to me, goes, if this is going to work, I need to be honest with you. I need to say some things that this hospital did that were bad experiences to me. And she was very nervous about that. And I said, look, you pay my salary. I don't care what you say about the hospital. If it affected you, it affected you. You talk about it. After 6 months, she said to her parents, every year at New Year's, they make one resolution that they have to share with the family. And she has an older brother and just her mom and dad. Last year, New Year's Eve, her wish for her family was, I want all of you to enter counseling because you've had vicarious trauma. You've lived through what I've been going through every day. And she goes, I'll give you 2 years, but you all need to start counseling. I said, wow, that's pretty good insight. Because this is heavy stuff, guys. It wears on us. Like I said, the DSM only gives us PTSD and complex PTSD. And please, guys, do not Google that because it will give you a whole list of things that might be going wrong with you. And you probably have 10 of them. Okay? What does that mean? It means you're human. It means you're normal. Everybody deals with stuff in different ways. Some people get super involved and try to find as much information as they can. Now, anybody out there done that? Looked up information and, right. Did it help? Exactly. We do it because we got to know the answer. But in the end, did it really help? Exactly. Exactly. Live every day like it is. Take your time. Let gratitude bring the happiness. Be happy for the little things. You know, I was married to somebody with ADHD. There's nothing I like better than like sitting outside and relaxing. If I was on a cruise, I said, hey, you want to come out and watch the sunset? You know what I got? How long is this going to take? I said, well, you know, the sun goes down, gets beautiful. Sometimes if there's clouds, they get pink. Really? How long is this going to take? Enjoy life. We don't enjoy life. We're so caught up in everything. We're caught up in worrying about our kid going off to college. We're caught up in worrying about, uh-oh, it's 6 months and it's time for my next scan. Not that that opens any trauma doors for anybody, but it does. And you may be having 2 months of great feeling and all of a sudden, boom. You know, if we lose somebody in our life. When my father passed away, there was a song by Dan Fogelberg called Leader of the Band. Love that song. I always considered it like that was my dad. He was the leader of the band. So after he died, I have like 3 days worth of music on my iPhone, you know, but I always have it on random in the car and it kept playing. I'm like, seriously, you're going to make me cry on the way to work today? Oh no, you're going to make me cry on the way home to work today. Oh, I'm going to cry to the grocery store today. You know, and I'm like, how can I reframe this? Okay, Dad, what's the message you're trying to give me today? that really took my brain down a, yep. It took me down another path. And I really liked that. I just wanted to read the definition of what they say medical trauma is. Emotional and physical response to pain, injury, serious illness, medical procedures, frightening treatment experiences. There are lots of different experiences related to illness, injury, or medical treatment that can be difficult, uncomfortable, or frightening. Nobody here's had any of this, right? Of course not. Not at all. People that have trauma have hypervigilance. I think people with ADHD have hypervigilance. People with trauma, it affects your amygdala in your brain, your fight or flight response. It's always in constant agitation. So you can really get zoned out with your behavior. And you know what the sad thing is about trauma? It's like a light switch. Boom. When it goes off, it goes off. You can be having a great day and all of a sudden, boom, it hits you. And if you're like me, I look back and say, okay, what triggered it? I may think about it for 2 weeks and not figure it out. And then I'll be out doing something and I'll be like, oh, that was it. People have avoidance behavior. They get anxious. We have intrusive memories and thoughts. We remember those past bad experiences. Some people get really emotionally dysregulated. Some people get very numb. And almost everybody that's ever has trauma has that startle response. They hear a siren. Unless you live somewhere like I work with a lot of kids and adults from inner city Baltimore, to them hearing ambulances, police cars, and gunshots, it's nothing. I'm like, wow, was that a gunshot? And the kid doesn't even lose a beat talking to me in my office. I'm like, whoa, okay. Well, that's their trauma. They're kind of numb by that. When a person is traumatized, it's not only the trauma they're healing from, but the number of times they weren't believed. It's being exposed to people who were defined their perpetrator in cases like that. It's being shamed for not letting it go. It's healing from the world's response to vulnerability. We all have it. I wanted today to make it seem it's okay. Because if anything happened, COVID ripped the door off people's trauma. It was a great psychology experiment. We put people in a box for 2.5 years. We made it their home, their school, and their place of work. It's a long psychology experience. And people got pushed beyond their coping mechanisms. Now, for us mental health counselors, it's been the best thing that's ever happened for us. Now the waiting list is like a year long to see us. And there aren't enough therapists out there. But it was a scary thing for people. And I personally think the best thing that came out of COVID was the fact that it kind of took some of the myth and the mystique of trauma. And people were better with it. Questions, guys? Oh, yeah, please, chime in.
Sorry. Because I think we want to bring it home a little bit to there's so much trauma going on. And I think just given the different scenarios we've been through, I mean, just to start it going, I mean, I can tell you in my case, as a mom, you think you're doing what's best for your kids, saying there's no effing way you're going to die. I'm going to get you through this. But it turned out what my son wanted to hear, I'm hearing, 20 years later, why didn't you validate that I was scared of dying? Why didn't you validate that as soon as I got through a brain tumor, then it was a transplant, then it was chronic Addison's, then it was, all the other horrible things that not even related to ALD. Yeah, he finally got diagnosed with complex PTSD. And I feel like I contributed to it. Because what worked for me dealing that trauma, I mean, I relate to the way, I'll say it, how Tim works with it. It's like, I was going to take all this negativity and turn it into, we're going to fight this. We're going to fight it for you and for any other family that's suffering from this horrible disease. That's not what my child needed. And boy, did I learn from that one. So I want to use this opportunity to personalize it because it is very different. I mean, unfortunately, I'm hearing it now. And I will say on the positive side, my son did just call me earlier this morning, and it was the first long conversation I had with him in months, very loving. He was very grateful for the way I listened to him and validate him and really have a good relationship. But part of it was really, really understanding deeply that what works for me may not work for anybody else. So this is where I did want to use the opportunity to talk about how trauma, PTSD, complex PTSD can really wreak havoc on top of sort of the physical manifestations. And again, see, for me, I've been doing drug development for, I won't even admit how many years, but based on my age, more than half my life. So for me, it was all like, oh, well, we'll just get rid of the underlying pathology. And I was not thinking mental stability and what the ramifications are, because it was like, look, you're healthy, you're living, you've got the medicine you need, no symptoms, but mental health is the invisible one. So there are symptoms. And I think that's really what we wanted to use today's session, was to really talk about, look, we think we're doing the best we can. We have to really open our hearts and our mind to the different manifestations in your family, in your friends, in your patients, in your social construct, to make sure that we're doing what's best for us, for our family. And I always say, you can't help others until you help yourself, or at least it's pretty difficult to. And for those who've been through the transplant unit, they always give you that lecture. Take care of yourself, because this is a long road. You got to take care of yourself, or you're not going to be able to take care of your child. And that's something that you got to stick with. So with that in mind, I want to turn over to Jesse, but I do want to hear, really, everyone's got a different way to think about how they deal with it themselves, but how to be there for the others around them dealing with trauma.
Hi, guys. Ooh, yikes. Is that better? Okay. I'm Jessie Torrey, and I've got the unique perspective because I'm a mental health counselor with less experience than Bruce. I throw that out there. But what I do have that he doesn't is ALD, myself, and a son who was diagnosed late 16 years ago with ALD and went through transplant. So I've been part of this community for 16 years in a personal way. I feel a little like you all cheated, because everything I was going to say today has been said by everybody who sat on this stage, because we all know that all of you who have ALD in their lives, whether you're a doctor, a researcher, the folks at Bluebird Bio, not that I'm outing you, but there were tears shed at some breakout sessions. And of course, the parents and those of us with ALD and AMN all struggle with our own trauma. I think it's really important, a few things, that we rely on our community. This community, whether it's this meeting, ALD Connect has the wonderful calls, the peer mentor program. Those Facebook pages are off the charts. And I think so helpful for the newborn screening parents in particular. So relying on community, not just your ALD community, but your communities at home, whether that includes, your religious community or your neighborhood or your school community. It's so important to rely on them. There's a real ripple effect when it comes to trauma, but there's also a ripple effect when it comes to healing trauma. So start that stone being tossed and share your story with your community and ask for help if you need it. Also finding joy. Tim was, again, like, I cheated because Tim said everything beautiful about being grateful first and happiness will follow. I often tell my clients to think of 3 good things that happened to them during the day. That's mighty hard, those of us who have been through transplant, to come up with those 3 good things, but it allows us a moment to pause and recognize that there is joy, sometimes even if it's a teeny morsel. So that's right. That's good. Everybody said everything already, but
No, I wanted to take advantage of really having a room of survivors. And when I say survivors, there's level of surviving. There's surviving and thriving, and there's surviving and just kind of like gasping for air below. So, but we're here and we're surviving and we're living, and that means we have an opportunity to thrive. But as wise people have told me, it takes a lot of strength to ask for help. And I feel like we're in an opportunity in this room to ask for help. So I guess what I would request for is if there's any shares where people can say, look, I didn't even realize I was experiencing the consequences of trauma. Or I didn't realize that I was not validating the trauma of my family or my kids. And, you know, we often talk about the affected child. We don't talk about their siblings and what they go through. I mean, I have the funny stories of my daughter saying like, Mom, I broke my arm, I broke my leg. And it was like, oh yeah, we're going to take Spencer to the hospital. And she's like, and I'm like, no, it's not broken. And she's like, you know, I also need medical treatment sometimes. Literally. I mean, I'm not kidding. 2 different times. She literally broke her hand, broke her leg. And it took, I think, a week till she got the casts on. You know, it's one of those things, you know, you don't realize you're doing it where it's like, well, he's the one that goes to the hospital. You're the healthy, you know, you take care of yourself, kid. You know, we can joke about it, but it has an impact. It has an impact. So that's why if I can just open it up to see what other people have to say on that.
I have to laugh, Amber, because for me, I have a similar situation with my girls that they were expected to be healthy because we are all eyes around John and all his appointments and all his varying ALD and non-ALD things. And just similarly, when my youngest was ready for kindergarten, and everyone always thinks this will not be me. I grew up with a sister with adrenal insufficiency. I did resent my parents for spending so much time and attention trying to get her diagnosed. I said, never me as a parent. And then we find ourselves where we are, and it comes time for the kindergarten paperwork. And I give it to the pediatrician's office, and they send it back blank. And I am miffed because I rock offices. I will be best friends with the front staff. We will get this done. I'm wheeling and dealing appointments. And I called them. I was, you know, maybe had a little heat. And I said, I don't understand. I've got to bring these forms in. What happened? And they said, I'm sorry, you never brought her in for her age 5 physical. She's not been, like, her vaccines were off. Like, I just talk about the squeaky wheel, got all the attention. And here I'm like, oh, right. And like to this day, you know, because you're only allowed to schedule appointments on your insurance 1 year from the last, and 1 year plus a day. So she is so far off on all of her kind of age appropriate, you know, she's fine. But I think she doesn't hold it against me. But it's one of those things where you get it's so possible to get laser focused, and you have a jarring moment where you realize I have taught, you know, it's always just when I think I've got it together that I realize I don't have anything together. I have dropped the easiest thing in the world, and hope that she's not going to hold it against me, or that they'll be okay.
You didn't though, drop. I've met your daughter and she's getting along just fine. And I don't think she got measles, mumps, or rubella. So it all worked out in the end. And those siblings are strong people. We need to take good care of them, but a lot of them do amazing things. I get teary when it comes to siblings.
I mean, the other thing on siblings is they often are, somebody had mentioned that their daughter was like, had an extra empathy when you grow up in that environment. But what that also means often is that they feel more for the parents and sometimes resent their sibling for what they put their parents through, because they see their parents desperate and they can't help but feel, and they feel guilty about it. They feel guilty that they resent that their sibling put their family through such hell and the family through such hell. So that everybody is impacted, everybody. And unless we really recognizes all the different ways it can impact you, it's really hard to get the fullness in terms of the thriving when surviving.
I'm so glad you covered the topic of like siblings and giving attention to them. It's not something that I even thought about. And I know that in my experience, you know, when I'm with my son, his twin sister gets slighted because I'm constantly thinking or have limited time with them. So I'm cherishing every moment, you know, with him. And she can tell the energy is different with him than with her. And she's deciding to be more clingy to me because I'm not giving that same energy in reciprocality to her that I do to her siblings. So now that I understand and know what I'm doing, you know, you thankfully you brought that to light for me so that I can change that when I'm with my you know, both my children with equal affection and treasured moments with both of them equally. Thank you.
The shops are set up just for that purpose. So it gets a group of kids together who are not in that one. You know, they're very. They're all over. They're all over.
There's some in limits.
So I know the theme is always put on your own oxygen mask first, right? In order to be able to help those around you. We know what that looks like on a plane. But when you are exposed to a disease like ALD, you start to learn how important that role modeling of self-care is. And I've learned it in many aspects of life, but certainly losing our 9-year-old son the day before he and his twin sister's 10th birthday to a complication from transplant was life altering. And all through transplant, I was seeing a therapist at the University of Minnesota, which was fantastic. And everybody said to me, you got to make sure your kids get help after we lost our son because of that trauma of losing their sibling. Now, that being said, it's easy enough said and done. And when they were young, you know, 10 and 13, it was easy to drag them to anything and everything I could. So I gave them the tools, the grief therapy, the family camps for kids, and it was really fantastic. But at the end of the day, now as adults, right, they need to navigate that grief process themselves. And I'm happy to say that all of my children, all 3 of them are in therapy, and they're 26, 28, and 36. And again, I find great solace in therapy. I think the vulnerability piece, which I showed throughout the loss of our son, and being able to continue to move on no matter how great the pain was important. I'm still, you know, trying to figure out my complex PTSD with my own, you know, with the loss of our son and many other obstacles that have come since then. But at the end of the day, you know, being able to be vulnerable in a setting with a therapist or a counselor, a group of grieving moms, a group of other ALD parents, whatever it is, that has literally saved my life. And I really encourage you to seek those who are similar in the process.
You know, I think the other thing is that, like you said, I mean, you're still dealing with it. You're still feeling it. People say, do you get over trauma? I think you get more educated on trauma. I mean, stuff is still going to scare us. Okay. Our memories of traumatic things are always going to be there, but we learn to understand ourselves a lot better and what might be triggering that. And, you know, it gets better. It certainly does. And I do agree that, like, the more people that can be involved in the process of counseling, really the better it is for all of you, because it's an outside person. You come into their office, it's your space, it's your time to share, it's your time to be vulnerable, and they're just going to listen and guide.
Am I okay to go? So for me, I hesitated to get up and say anything, but I think there may be other men, fathers like me that might be listening, maybe even in this room. What I think of as trauma for me may be a little bit more niche, but not unimportant. So I'm gonna just say, you know, my wife has ALD. Her mother, there's a lot of family history on her side of the family. We have two boys that are doing quite well. It's just up on stage. But I think somewhere in there for me as the father figure in our family, as supposedly the healthy guy, you know, having my wife and my two boys, there's definitely, even though they're doing well, I know I feel some trauma, but I really could not express to anybody exactly what that is. Like, I don't really know how to verbalize that as being the father in a family with 3 of my immediate family members having ALD. I think I do an okay job at it, but I don't really know with bad jokes, right? Boom, boom. But I just felt like it's maybe a little more niche or adjacent to what some of the folks in this room may be feeling or have, but I still feel like it's important.
I'm going to take this because our community has this terrible habit of ranking who's suffering more and being embarrassed that, and I'm guilty of it too. I'm a woman with ALD, but I feel that I shouldn't complain because my symptoms aren't profound, but it's still a hard path for me. I'm the primary caregiver for my son who requires a lot of physical attention. I've had 2 significant falls in the last year, but we need to stop that. You're allowed to be in pain, and we're allowed to validate that pain and help you work through it.
And I think you also mentioned something that at least I've seen with complex PTSD that was misdiagnosed for many years. When you said you can't articulate it, because when I asked, well, like, when you say you've had trauma, and they're like, I don't know, I can't give it words. And that's also a symptom. And as a result, it can very easily, some of the dysregulation can be misdiagnosed as all kinds of other mental disorders. And I think we have to acknowledge that trauma can really have an incredible impact, and very otherwise intelligent, articulate people really have trouble articulating. So that is a really common thing. And it's interesting that it's coming from some, I've heard this from people in similar situations where they're like I wouldn't say the provider, that whatever, they're the people who otherwise are totally spot on, doing everything, taking care of everything and all that, but somehow that piece they can't articulate. And I don't think that's an accident. I think, and I'll look to the professionals, that's a symptom of trauma.
It's definitely a symptom of trauma. And, you know, I mean, again, after COVID, the healthcare professionals, they felt trauma probably worse than they'd ever felt it before. There's a team at Kennedy Krieger, and the social worker working with them said, you guys are really stressed out. You guys are just all suffering from trauma. And that doctor decided, well, what should you do? Now, there are lots of books out there on trauma. He chose one by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score. It just does a wonderful job of explaining to us how the autonomic nervous system sends messages to the sympathetic nervous system and how trauma affects our body every day. And he bought that for the entire team, a book for the entire team. I was just delighted to see that they're understanding that a lot of the patients and families coming in to see them have trauma. So when there are things that they ask the patient or the family to do and they don't, they're like, you know, this family's just not doing stuff. Well, if you ask them what's going on, like, don't just like talk, like what are they struggling with? It's looking at that big picture. Trauma affects everybody. And I'm happy to see more and more medical teams getting trauma informed, because I think it's only going to help patient care more. And what you described absolutely is a common feeling of, it just kind of feels off. It just, you know, you have days where it's like, gosh, I'm tired. By the way, you're thinking about a lot, you're worried about a lot. That takes extra energy. And we're really good at processing our energy. We're also really good at processing our anxiety. Somebody asked me, like, what is trauma like? I said, imagine a snow globe, right? Trauma's when you shake it up, and that side of your brain's in a blizzard. You got to get out of that side of your brain. You got to do some mindfulness. I'll tell somebody to do something and they'll go, Mr. Bruce, that is really stupid. I said, yeah, it really is stupid, but just do what I said. Go outside, take a piece of paper and a pen and write down the first 5 things you see. And they'll do that. And they'll go like, well, that was really dumb. I said, yeah, but did you think about all the crap you were worried about while you were doing that? No, you got to get out of that haze, that craziness. You got to do, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to give ourselves grace. We have to say, hey, it's okay. You have a crappy day, you're allowed to have a crappy day. You know, and those around you, it's okay. You may not want to, you want to feel strong, but it's okay to not be strong at times.
Hi, you kind of just answered my question. But when I was first diagnosed with ALD, everyone told me, be nice to yourself. Be nice to yourself. And I mean, I have absolutely no idea what that means.
Well, I mean,
I don't know what that means.
well, one thing you can do, I sometimes tell people, I say, when you get out of the shower, you're getting dressed in the morning, just do this, look in the mirror and say, I am strong. Just try it. It's a simple thing. I am strong. Do it every day. You will see a change over time.
All right. That was loud. I'm in a pretty good situation. In fact, that I went through the bone marrow transplant and did all the MRIs that your kids and your sons are going through right now. And I'm 31 years old now, and I'm able to articulate what it is that I've gone through. And I'm really glad that a handful of the parents mentioned this during their presentations, but I think it's very important. First and foremost, they're your son, they're a kid. And secondly, they're patient. Growing up, there was a lot of times that my parents treated me more of a patient than their son. Even now, my mom will, every time I call her, she says, "Do you take your medicine today?" And I'm 31 years old or something like that. And I think it's just really important for the parents to note they're your son. They're not your patient.
You know, I think that's important. Very important. And I can't stress enough, and probably the same way, Jesse, is you give yourself grace. That patient I talked about earlier who told her family that she wanted them all to enter therapy, she's a huge Marvel movie fan. And she went to see the most recent Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but I don't recommend it because we find out about, you know, the raccoon and what his life went through. And she said, I had to walk out of the movie 4 times. But I said, hey, good for you to know that that's what it was. And she went out and took some deep breaths. But a movie triggered her medical stuff. Give yourself grace. You're not going crazy. You're reacting to stimuli that the body has felt over and over again.
For those of you who haven't seen the movie, because when Bruce told me that story, I had to figure out what it was. They're experimenting on the raccoon, like as a subject.
Yep.
And my son, who isn't into Marvel movies, I said, did that movie give you trauma? Did it give you any PTSD? He was like, yeah, it is. It did actually hit me. He said, because that's how I feel. You know, for those of you who have dealt with having a transplant, every single year you go back and you go under the microscope and get looked at and poked and prodded to make sure everything's fine. And yeah, it is a little bit, it is kind of traumatic.
Are we, oh,
Oh, wait, Karen. At least I'm active, not sitting on my butt today.
Thanks, Amber. So that was very loud. I just want to go back a bit to siblings. So my identical twin sons were diagnosed when my youngest son was born. And my husband and I vowed that he wasn't going to miss out on anything. He doesn't have ALD. And so he was going to have a completely normal life. And that's what we did. we were absolutely exhausted, but he did everything and more. He was spoiled, hands up. Whatever he wanted, he got, because we were overcompensating. So we felt that by taking him everywhere, letting him do everything, that was going to give him a better life and was going to make up for his brothers being ill. And word of caution to any parents doing that. He's a lovely young man now. For those who have met him, he's here with me this weekend. But boy, did we pay for it during his teenage years. So what I'm trying to say is, yeah, there's a happy medium. So, allow your kids to, Glenn went swimming club. He was a national swimmer. He was a national athlete. He did all of this. We were on our knees sometimes to make his life so perfect. So yeah, word of caution, might seem fine when they're little. When you get to teenage, it'll come and bite you.
And the pressure of perfect is unrealistic, really. I know after this session, there's a breakout session where Kathleen and I are doing some mindfulness together. No, stop rolling your eyes, because I know a lot of you are and thinking, oh no, I'm going to eat candy and drink coffee instead. I want to just remind you that mindfulness is really a skill. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. And it's getting back to the present. So I recommend you all join us in the breakout room for some chair yoga and mindfulness.
Yeah, we will. You
Don't
still
tempt
get
them with the
no.
snack.
We'll get the snack, but then you can do the mindfulness and the yoga.
But I mean,
you get both.
Hey, look, I joked. I went to Jesse last night and said, I was just kind of wound up when I was laying down last night, and I took out the Calm app on my phone and I listened to a 5-minute meditation. And next thing I know, it was 7 hours later. I'm like, wow, that was good. I'm a firm believer of mindfulness.
But before we do our candy high and then mindfulness, I just want to make sure that everyone here had an opportunity to address this. I'm happy to see with so many medical professionals, when I say medical, that there was a real openness to, we also have to talk about mental health. Like if we're only addressing one side, it is not the whole person. So I really think it's critical. And, when we deal with such serious diseases, we sometimes forget that if you don't deal with the whole person, you don't get a whole person. So I want to make sure if there's any, even clinicians who want to say anything, you don't have to have lived personally through trauma. You can witness trauma.
So I just have a question for the experts. My daughter was 5 when my son passed away, and she never went to therapy. She's always been really outgoing, always had a lot of friends, done a lot of activities. But when I did speak to a therapist, they thought maybe later in life this would affect her. So I'm starting to think about it more so now, because next year she'll be away at college and I'm just terrified. Did I not do the right thing? Should I have insisted she went to therapy? Should I insist on that now? So I'm just kind of lost on that.
I think you need to breathe and forgive yourself for the decisions you've made. You've been an extraordinary mother, and I've watched it real time. I do think there are some benefits starting a child with therapy before they make a giant transition, no matter what the circumstances are. So they have a relationship with somebody they feel comfortable, but she's got to be on board. Nothing's worse than sending someone to therapy and they sit with their arms crossed. You've seen it, and they're not willing to do the work.
They won't talk at all. They'll just sit there.
Make sure the school has a program. The schools are so much better than they used to be about having mental health programs there. So do that research.
Yeah, I mean, if it happens, then you go that direction. But no, you were very preoccupied. she was 5.
Hi, I just, as a geneticist, I often have to be the one that delivers the trauma. I don't know that there's a good way to do this. I've experienced my own trauma and been a patient on the other side, so I do try and draw from that experience to try and make it as positive as an experience as possible, or at least just to not make it be awful. But does anyone have any comments that they would like to share for how we can deliver devastating news to a family in a way that makes it a little less hard?
Well, I think one of the problems is we get anxious ourselves when we have to convey that information. You've done it. You are anticipatory anxiety is a wonderful thing. We all get it. And you're thinking, how is this family going to react? I've got to give them bad news. I think you just go in and matter-of-factly sit down and say, look, let me just talk to you about the results that happened. They sometimes joke at me at Kennedy because the doctors say, every time you talk to a family, they cry. Why? I said, I don't know. I just go in there and say, you've seen a lot of different specialists today. Has anybody told you what a good job you're doing and how hard this is? That's the instant line that gives that time for the family to really be seen and know that you're seeing that. You could start with a line like that.
I think that's so important, but so is providing them the information they need. So much trauma is compounded by the fact that people are scared, and they're scared by the unknown. And I mean, even 16 years ago, what did I do? I went back, I didn't have a smartphone because it was 16 years ago, but I went back to the computer and Googled adrenal leukodystrophy. I know you all did, right? And that was the first bit of information. ALD Connect, ALD Alliance, you all have done a great job of pushing the positive information up to the top, but if it can come from the genetic counselor, it would be a really powerful thing that would give them comfort.
And you got to give yourself grace. You have to give yourself grace.
Yeah. Can you give Karen a mic? The other thing I'll add just from being on the other end is space. So like just pausing and looking like you want to hear what they are thinking and saying. Because sometimes you just feel like, oh my God, I just heard like crazy, I can't process. If the person would just pause and like, silence is a powerful tool.
It is. I mean, remember the movie Jerry Maguire? You had me at hello. That was the last thing she heard. Okay. Sometimes the family only hears maybe the first sentence you say, and then boom, they shut down. So we have to, like you said, sit and listen to what they heard. If we have to say it 10 times, we say it 10 times. Just the same way we delivered it the first. And like, do you need some time? Do you need to get up? Do you need to get some water? Do you need to take a walk in the hall? Let them be.
So I just want to say that if at all possible, think about the time and the day that you're giving these results. I was told on late on a Friday afternoon. We were the only ones who'd, well, apart from the doctor and us were the only ones who knew this diagnosis. And, we went home. By the time we got home, everywhere was closed, and there was no one to go to. It was 21 years ago today, actually, and we didn't have Google. I'm glad that we didn't have Google. But, if you're going to give a devastating diagnosis, then if at all possible, don't do it on a Friday afternoon, would be my ask.
Okay.
Well, I mean, now that with the open notes, I mean, like I had to have some scan done. I knew before my doctor told me because it popped up in my chart. Oh, no. I guess what I'm looking at is good, and I guess I'll find out. But so that's that's another thing that's been added to the mix is now we get that information early.
All right. Oh yeah, wait. You wanted to add something, and then and then Kelly, if you can tell us the logistics for the next set.
I'll try to keep it short, but I've worked with the Missouri Newborn Task Force with the geneticist in Missouri on that exact thing. And I just want to drive home some things that are kind of already been said. When you give that news, and I know Lisa and I think we're talking about this yesterday, just make sure that you have, in Missouri, I've told them, please give them my website. Please give them my email. If you have resources in state of families who already have the diagnosis and they're willing to share their info, because I know you can't give, like I can't get those newly diagnosed families info. I have to give mine to them. If you can have that lined up ahead of time so that when you give them that diagnosis, you can say, you know, this is really hard, but we have resources for you. We have Knockout ALD or we have ALD Connect. Go to their website. We have a family already diagnosed who lives, 2 miles away. They're willing to talk with you about this. Here is their email. Adrenal insufficiency. That is something that you can look at pretty soon after, and it is treatable, and your child can survive that. And there is treatment and medication that can get under control. Anything that will give them hope. There is treatment for ALD. Your child can be monitored. Things that give them hope before they ever get on that computer after they get off the phone or see you. Have a list, have it ready. I know in Missouri, we worked on a sheet that has those things on it. The worst thing I think is like Karen said, if they get that news on a Friday and they have no resources, they have no one to contact. If they have a list of our organizations and even better, people who are in state who have been there, ALD families, someone they can talk to, I think that's so important. Some positive information. It's treatable. We have treatment.
Like all of you, I also experienced lots of trauma. I had a son who died from ALD, a son who had a transplant from ALD, and a son who does not have ALD, but lived through all of it. And the surviving 4 of us, my husband and I, and my two sons, we're sort of managing okay, relatively speaking. But now I'm just thinking, I think I need to bring all this back up, and it's not bring it up because it's always there, but talk to my sons, the one who had the transplant, the one who had to deal with not having not having all the attention, and apologize and do some more for them. I don't know
if you need to apologize, but by bringing it up, you could have a simple conversation like, when we were going through all this, was there something I could have done differently? That just kind of opens the door for them to, well, now what they may say may surprise you, but I mean, that opens the door for that discussion.
And moving forward, what you can do to support them, and don't walk around with guilt. That's not going to help.
Never does.
Okay. I just wanted to add to what Julie had said. Like Karen, I also found out on 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, and there was nobody to call, and I was frantically Googling our newborn screening panel up in Canada, horrified to know that there was no way in hell that they had screened my son for this. But I know at the time that my son Connor was diagnosed, I was so utterly horrified that when they asked me if I wanted to speak to somebody else who had been diagnosed, I wasn't in a place where I could accept that. And so I would just encourage anybody giving that news to perhaps follow up and maybe offer that information more than once, because they might at a later date be more readily able to accept it.
Yeah, so just to echo a lot of things that have been said, and I to Alex's question before, which is really important, how healthcare providers also can deal with the trauma and this communication moment, which in my experience is often the hardest for people who have the least familiarity with the disease, and they bring all their the anxiety and panic and unknown to that conversation, and exacerbates sort of the anxiety on the other side as well. Some tips and tricks that have worked for me over the years is attempting to own it quickly. So quickly stepping in and saying, acknowledging uncertainty, acknowledging that one will be there and will continue to follow, and giving my cell phone number or doing other things like that are very simple tricks that have helped me and helped families. I think the other thing I often will do is I will simply ask, what do you think this means? And the simple question, to Amber's point, really gives pause and allows to then have the family reflect back. And often that is the best way to step in and know that what you're saying is being heard, because otherwise you can give them all sorts of information that they're not hearing. But if you hear their question, then it's much easier to relate and connect. So there's, again, not one size fits all, but there's a little bit of this sort of mental jujitsu that you have to do in the moment. And I think there really are ways to get good at this, and so there's hope.
All right, I know this is a really important topic. We will cover this again. And just looking at people's expressions, I know that you're finding peers that would welcome anybody else talking to them and sharing and helping. It comes in waves. So you may have a good day today. You may think everyone in your family is good today, and hopefully they are, but next week, next year, when they leave for college, like, things change. So we just have to be open and realize it comes in waves, and really ask for help, share, and be there.